The signal before words. Why civilizations guard their ghosts. The rooms fell silent long before anyone spoke, a stillness that carried meaning the way fog carries cold, invisible but undeniable, shaping everything it touched. Across centuries and continents, groups have gathered in parliaments, war rooms, tribal councils, and corporate boardrooms, believing themselves rational, strategic, evolved. Yet beneath every decision, a pattern repeats, older than language, deeper than thought. They defend what doesn't work. They cling to errors, not because they're foolish, but because something preverbal whispers that letting go means dissolving. What if the greatest trap civilizations fall into isn't ideology or corruption, but the signals they can't name? Most of us know the feeling. You're in a meeting, surrounded by intelligent people, and someone points out an obvious flaw in the plan. The room tenses. Not with anger, exactly, with something more primal. A collective holding of breath. The flaw remains. The plan continues. Later, when it fails, everyone will claim they saw it coming. This isn't stupidity. It's something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. Groups don't just think together. They feel together, in frequencies below conscious awareness. Before words form, before arguments sharpen, the collective nervous system has already decided what threatens and what protects. Scientists call this pre-symbolic communication the transmission of emotional states through posture, breath, rhythm, microexpressions, and hormonal synchrony. It's how flocks turn in unison, how crowds panic as one entity, how nations march toward wars everyone privately doubts, and it's why errors become sacred. Imagine a tribe 10,000 years ago, huddled against the night. One member suggests a new path through the forest, shorter, but unfamiliar. The group's collective breathing sharpens. Pupils dilate. Cortisol floods, bloodstreams in unconscious harmony. No one speaks, but the message transmits perfectly. Deviation feels like death. The path is rejected before it's debated. The familiar route, even if longer and more dangerous, carries the comfort of shared memory. The tribe survives, not by optimal decisions, but by cohesion. We still carry that circuitry. Every corporation, every government, every social movement operates on the same ancient code: unity over accuracy, collective comfort over individual insight. The question isn't whether we're trapped by this pattern. The question is whether we can see it while it's happening. Was it strategy or the echo of a fear too old to recognize? Throughout history, empires have repeated catastrophic mistakes with eerie precision. Rome expanded until it couldn't defend its borders. Spain extracted so much gold it collapsed its own economy. The Soviet Union built a system that required lies to function and believed them. Each time, there were voices of warning. Advisors who saw the mathematics of collapse. Generals who understood the overreach. Economists who calculated the inevitable crash. They were ignored. Not because their logic was flawed, but because their message triggered the group's deepest alarm. We might be wrong about who we are. For a collective identity, that's not a question. It's an existential threat. Psychologists studying group dynamics have discovered something unsettling. When a tribe, organization, or nation faces evidence that contradicts its founding narrative, the collective nervous system reacts as if facing annihilation. The threat isn't to their ideas, it's to the invisible bonds that make them us. So they protect the error, they ritualize it. They build monuments to it. Because admitting the mistake means rewriting the story of who they've been, and groups would rather collapse than dissolve their mythology. For a moment, consider your own life. The relationships you maintained too long. The jobs you stayed in past their expiration. The beliefs you defended even as evidence quietly accumulated against them. You weren't being irrational. You were protecting something deeper, the coherence of your self-story, the continuity of identity across time. Now multiply that by millions. Give it institutions, armies, and the weight of history. That's how nations think. The American obsession with freedom often manifests as an inability to accept collective responsibility. The French reverence for intellectual clarity can become paralysis through overanalysis. Russia's historical trauma creates a permanent state of defensive aggression. Each pattern, forged in crisis centuries ago, becomes the unspoken law that governs every new decision. These aren't conscious choices. They're emotional rhythms transmitted generation to generation through stories, symbols, and the way parents breathe when certain topics arise. Carl Jung observed that nations develop shadows just as individuals do, the exiled traits that become obsessions. What a culture denies in itself, it projects onto enemies. What it can't admit, it repeats. The turbulence comes from trying to speak what has no words yet. Maybe the errors aren't bugs in our collective cognition, maybe they're features, stabilizers, the cost we pay for belonging. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch conducted his famous conformity experiments. Participants were shown 3 lines and asked which matched a reference line. The answer was obvious. But when surrounded by actors giving wrong answers, 75% of participants conformed at least once, choosing the clearly incorrect line to maintain group harmony. What's haunting isn't that people lied, it's that many genuinely saw the wrong line as correct. The group's signal overrode their perception. This is pre-symbolic turbulence in action. The collective emotional field reshapes individual reality before thought can intervene. You're not choosing to agree, you're feeling your way toward coherence with the group's nervous system. Multiply this across institutions and generations, and you get entire civilizations defending mistakes that everyone privately senses but no one can name. The question becomes, how do you speak what has no language? Was it progress, or just the same pattern with better tools? Watch a modern organization make a decision. PowerPoints glow with data. Metrics promise objectivity. Everyone speaks the language of reason. Yet beneath the conference table, legs bounce with nervous energy. Breathing synchronizes, microsignals of dominance and submission flicker in millisecond bursts. The decision is made pre-verbally, through emotional contagion. The data is assembled afterward to justify what the collective nervous system already chose. This doesn't mean we're doomed to repeat history. It means history repeats through us until we learn to sense the pattern forming. Some groups have learned. Indigenous councils that require silence before speaking. Quaker meetings that wait for clarity to emerge from collective stillness. Certain meditation practices that train awareness of preconscious signaling. These traditions understood something modern institutions forgot, that groups think with their bodies before their minds, and that wisdom requires recognizing the difference. The turbulence isn't the problem. The turbulence is the signal trying to break through, the part of us that knows we're trapped but hasn't found words yet. The content is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical, financial, or professional advice and should not be used as a substitute for guidance from qualified professionals. All decisions made based on this content are the sole responsibility of the individual. Here's what shifted for me. I spent years studying why smart people defend obvious mistakes in governments, companies, families, my own life. The logic always crumbled under examination, yet the pattern persisted. Then, I encountered this idea through a series of essays on collective psychology, not as theory, but as lived observation. What surprised me most wasn't what I learned about group dynamics, but how keeping a daily reflection journal helped me notice my own pre-verbal signals, the way my chest tightened when facing certain truths, the subtle shift in my breathing when a conversation approached forbidden territory. I wasn't expecting that kind of clarity. It reminded me that seeing the world differently always starts with sensing ourselves differently, the signals we transmit before we know we're transmitting them. This isn't a recommendation, just something that changed how I process my own resistance to change. I'll mention it only because awareness of these patterns begins with awareness of pattern itself. Civilizations collapse not from external pressure, but from internal incoherence, the gap between what they know and what they can admit knowing. The Soviet Union didn't fall because capitalism won. It fell because maintaining the collective fiction required more energy than the system could generate. Every citizen knew the shelves were empty while propaganda proclaimed abundance. The pre-symbolic truth felt in every cue, every shortage, every whispered conversation, finally overwhelmed the symbolic order. The turbulence had been building for decades. The words came last. This is how all great transformations occur. The old pattern becomes unsustainable. The collective nervous system begins registering distress. Small cracks appear, jokes, art, underground movements. These aren't causes of change. They're symptoms that the pre-verbal signal is breaking through. But the defenders of the old error feel this turbulence as danger. They tighten control. They demand loyalty. They punish the messengers who name what everyone feels. Not because they're evil, but because they're human, and humans in groups will sacrifice truth for coherence, reality for identity, the future for the familiar, until the cost of maintaining the illusion exceeds the fear of letting go. Imagine watching yourself from outside, not judging, just observing. You'd see patterns you insist don't exist. Repetitions you claim are coincidences. The way you defend certain stories with an intensity that reveals how fragile they are. Groups are the same. Nations write histories that airbrush their shadows. Corporations develop cultures that punish inconvenient truths. Families construct mythologies that everyone must honor. The pre-symbolic turbulence is the psyche's attempt to break its own spell. When a country suddenly pivots toward authoritarianism, it's not because citizens became stupid overnight. It's because the collective nervous system, overwhelmed by complexity and change, retreats to the most primitive signal. Follow strength. Doubt is death. Unity over truth. When a social movement that began with justice descends into purity spirals and infighting, it's not betrayal of principles. It's the group reprioritizing cohesion over mission, the ancient code reasserting itself. When a company known for innovation becomes bureaucratic and risk-averse, it's not poor management. It's the organization's nervous system choosing survival through sameness over the turbulence of adaptation. These aren't different phenomena. They're the same pattern, operating at different scales. The question isn't how to avoid it. The question is how to sense it emerging, and whether we can hold space for turbulence without collapsing into certainty. For a moment, just silence. No answers, no resolutions. Just the recognition that we're all swimming in signals we can't name, defending errors we can't see, trapped in patterns we mistake for truth. What if the path forward isn't more certainty, but more awareness of uncertainty? Not stronger beliefs, but better sensing of what we believe before we think it. History doesn't repeat because we forget. It repeats because we remember, selectively preserving the narratives that protect our collective identity while exiling the truths that threaten it. But every exile leaves traces. Every repressed signal eventually resurfaces. Every lie told long enough becomes the truth that destroys the liar. The turbulence is the future, trying to be born through the wreckage of what we thought we were. The rooms are silent again, but this time, the silence carries something different. Not the weight of unspoken truths, but the possibility of truths not yet speakable. Somewhere in that gap, civilizations transform. Not through revolution or revelation, but through the slow, painful work of learning to sense what moves beneath words, and having the courage to speak it anyway. The groups that survive aren't the strongest or the smartest. They're the ones who learn to distinguish between the comfort of coherence and the fertility of turbulence. They're the ones who realize that errors become entrenched, not despite our intelligence, but because of our need to belong. And they're the ones brave enough to ask, what are we defending that we can't afford to defend anymore? If this made you think differently, you've already joined the shadow. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. What surprised you most about how we protect collective mistakes, or how those mistakes protect us? See you in the next video. Bye.